Just a quick introduction. So I'm Caitlin King. I'm with Mercury Programs with MassDEP. I'm going to be poking through a PowerPoint presentation. So I won't be able to see much, but Lynn, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Lynn Kane with the Flora and Toxics programs at EP.
So Lynn's going to be admitting people as they come in and helping with the chat, reading questions. So if you have any questions in the chat, Lynn's going to read those for us. And then Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Richard Blanchet, Deputy Division Director of the Hazardous Materials Management Programs at MassDEP. And this is one of the programs that we're overseeing right now.
Okay, and in just a second, I'm gonna share my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, can everyone give me a thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint? Thanks. Okay, so this is the third meeting for the MassDEP Household Hazardous Waste Household Hazardous Products Action Plan. So this is our third draft for those of you who are just joining us. So as we poke through, we welcome any comments, questions, suggestions, any discussion topics, and we will be aware of the time. So if anything has not been addressed that you'd like to discuss, you're more than welcome to email me, and my email address was with the registration information. It's Caitlin.E.King at mass.gov. And with that, we're going to walk through the table that is in the Household Hazardous Products Action Plan document. Okay, so in the spirit of moving it along, I'm not going to read the entire slide, but I'm just going to be reading the goals and the elements. So this is the expansion of low volume, high toxicity collection. So the goal here is to expand access to permanent collection facilities. And then the elements include continue to provide grant funding to municipalities and regional groups to establish permanent collection centers. The next element is to work with hazardous waste companies to expand private permanent collection opportunities. And the final element is to review annual data for effectiveness and identify gaps in coverage and accessibility. So if anybody has any questions or comments about any of the cells in this table, please let us know and we will discuss.
So we just want to add to that, all these tables that you'll be seeing today were basically in the draft plan that was emailed to you almost 2 weeks ago, or just shy of 2 weeks ago. This is pretty much the exact same information that was in there. So hopefully you had time to review the information in the draft plan and that we're actually presenting here today.
Dan, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Caitlin, because I don't have the last version in front of me, maybe it's just for me, but I think it would be helpful if when you're going through the slides, you could point out anything that's changed since version 2? Because I don't have version 2 memorized, so I don't know. This looks very much like the same slide as the last time, but are you able to just identify areas that maybe were edited or added from the last meeting?
Yes. Just give me one
And
second with that.
probably the
Um,
best
I don't-
way to answer that is that we synthesize a lot of the information from the first and second meeting, which we had was a lot of information, and we actually kind of like tighten it up to make it more concrete in these things. So I think, and then we zeroed in on some of the elements that we want to present here today. So I think we were kind of like, if you remember, like the second version of this was a little bit like all over the place. We actually kind of looked at it and thought of it more carefully, and then I actually started putting things in where they would appear to be more make more sense. We kind of developed, some of the grant funding. We zeroed in on some of those things. So we could try to do, what you're asking, but I think it'd be a somewhat busy. But it doesn't look like a lot like the same thing. But as we move through, we actually kind of like tightened up the information for each one of these slides.
So Richard, are you saying that it's pretty much the same exact framework as what we saw last time? You maybe just
It's a
dug
slightly bit.
down a little deeper on some of the topics, but there's nothing new. There are no new elements or nothing.
I wouldn't say there's no new elements. The elements have been fleshed out more,
Okay,
and the framework is a slightly bit different framework. We had it a certain way, and it was like, it actually makes more sense doing it the way we have it now.
okay,
And so we fleshed it out. So there might be some, I don't want to say like a completely new, new idea, new element. Probably not. I don't remember because there's a lot of things in here. What we tried to do is try to flesh them out more, and that based on the comments that we had the last time, maybe talk to, do this more research or, find out more information. So
okay,
we did a little bit more of that and then
all right,
incorporate that in here. So that's kind of what
okay,
is represented in these
great.
slides. It
Thank
may
you.
look some of them may look exactly the same from like presentation number 2. But I think some of these key elements in the first few slides that we'll be going through, I think they just became a little bit more tighter as far as the information.
Okay, all right, great, thank
More
you.
directed. It's more directed.
Phil, you have your hand raised?
Good morning. Yes,
Morning.
thanks, everybody. The 11 permanent centers, do you have a list of those on the website somewhere, or you can send them out?
Yes, I believe they're on the SWAC website. Um,
The SWAC website?
I'm sorry. Is John on?
You mean the
Lynn?
solid waste master plan?
Yeah, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. Yeah.
Okay.
John is on.
We added a page on the Solid Waste Advisory Committee page for this group. There also is another web page for some of these programs. I'm going to grab a link to that page in a minute and I'll put it into the chat. That has
Okay.
some of the information that you're asking about, Phil, I think, but let me grab that and put it in the chat.
Okay. I see Kathy put a link in here. I think I suggested last time that you integrate this into the solid waste master plan information. Wherever that's kept, you would have like all your plans linked to that. I know you couldn't incorporate it into the solid waste master plan as you indicated last time, but I think we need a home for this so we can see progress and updates. For example, streamline permitting process. That sounds great. What does that mean? What are you going to do about it? Do you have draft documents you're going to put out? Have a home for all of these elements in one spot. I'd like to know where the permanent centers are so I could link to them on my website, that kind of thing. So, okay, thanks,
So
Kathy.
just to close the loop on your specific question, the link that Kathy put in the chat does have the
Okay,
permanent centers.
great, thank you. So that's a general comment is put it in a couple of places, I know it may be one place, but if you're going to have the solid waste master plan, you get a home for that. All the plans, the organics plan, as I mentioned before, they're all kind of related to the solid waste master plan goals. So to me, in my mind, it'd be nice to have a home for all of that for a solid waste manager to not have to hunt through different pages, although they could be located elsewhere, they could be synthesized there. In terms of funding, I know you're limited with the SMRP and the REX and what you can do with that. So I would just add that the goal would be provide grant funding, that the assumption not be made that you're limited to the funds that we talked about last time, that you explore federal resources, other resources within the state, whether it's other departments within EEA or other agencies outside of the rec funding, including bond bills like the one that may be coming up. Because I think to get more permanent centers, we need a significant amount of money, especially in urban areas, millions and millions of dollars. And I don't believe there's adequate funding in the SMRP. So I would add that as a follow-up to provide funding. With the limited amount you have, it's really not enough to do a comprehensive system. So I think those are repeat comments from last time, but good to see that you're drilling down a little bit deeper. Thank you.
Always looking for more money, Phil. We're always looking for more money.
Absolutely. So if there's a way you want to have a brainstorm on that, but I know the governor is indicating potentially the bond bill may be coming out. There is a request in that, as you know. So fingers crossed we can get you some more money. But if you want to have a subgroup on that to help brainstorm with you on other ideas to try to expand that pie, I'd love to help out.
Okay.
Thanks. Claire?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to concur with Phil. I am ever so grateful for the grant that we got from MassDEP, but it's, we had to get another grant, and we're having issues with our South Shore Recycling Cooperative Facility. Just getting bids is tough, but the costs are going up fast. We're looking at tariffs coming in. We're running into some heavy headwinds on our project. So I just, if we really want to make this happen, I know money is always a problem and it's going to get worse before it gets better, but that's just a reality of what's going on. And if we could get the private sector in a little bit more and figure out a way to make it work with EPR or something like that, I think this system would be a lot more viable and robust. So that's all.
Thank you. Are there any more comments or questions on this slide? Okay, we're going to move on. So there's the expansion of low volume and high toxicity collection. The goal is to encourage and expand one-day event reciprocal agreements. The elements include municipal assistance coordinators, max assistance with support and coordination of regional events. The next element is for MassDEP to provide technical assistance on event permits, reciprocal agreements, and streamline the approval processes. And the final element is to include small business access and haulers. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this slide? Jan, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, I'm wondering what you mean by hauler. To haulers? Haulers with hazardous waste or hazardous waste haulers? What does that mean?
Yes,
Well,
hazardous waste haulers.
okay, I guess can you tell me more because I'm not familiar with that option. Like I think of hazardous waste haulers as Clean Harbors and Trident and Triumvirate. So how would they be included in a one-day event? Or you're saying bring them, get more of them? I guess I don't understand what that means, hauler.
We could expand on that. I think my interpretation of it would be finding small businesses that can remove the waste from one-day events.
I don't think there's any such thing. I mean,
Not an option.
you need to be a licensed hazardous waste hauler in the state of Massachusetts to remove any hazardous waste from a household hazardous waste collection. So you can't be, waste management. You can't be JRB hauling. You need to be a licensed, permitted waste hauler, hazardous waste hauler. So I understand getting small businesses like, and you may want to say VSQGs, there because that's how DP regs classify them. But I think unless you can really clarify what you mean by hauler, it may just not fit there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think we were trying to capture the comments from the previous meetings, and this is helpful. This is our last meeting, and hopefully we can fine tune this. So.
Okay, great.
Any other questions or comments on this slide before we move on? Phil?
Yeah, I think also there's the universal waste folks that are in, that could do some of the, I'm sorry, this is the high toxicity. I take that back. Never mind. It actually just remembered what I was going to say about the other slide, which was working with private facilities. I think it would be helpful for you to have discussions with private companies that want to collect hazardous materials curbside or expand at their facilities. I've heard of a company, I won't mention any names, a major company that wants to do this that they do in other states where it's kind of like a concierge service. You call up and they pick it up at your house at the curb. You schedule a pickup. So I think I would urge the committee, group at DEP to reach out to the major players that like a Clean Harbors, I can't, what's the company that you have out there, Jan, the one you have permanent, any something?
NEDT.
NEDT?
Yeah, there you go. And then again, some of the haulers, I think, WM comes to mind. I think they have programs around the country. So when you say to work out with private, I think they could be a player in expanding access and facilities and options that could be useful to everybody.
Thank you. Greg? You're muted, Greg.
Sorry. Yeah, Bill, just to follow up on that, I've had some preliminary conversations with some of the TSDF facilities about doing more of what the NEDTs do in terms of being a readily available, ongoing, permanent collection centers. And talking with them, we were going to be talking more about like, well, what would be needed for that? I mean, there's maybe some permit needs, but there's probably, I'm not against capital needs and looking at some of our business development grants that we have to try to establish that type of operation if it will encourage them to do so. And it would seem to me to be a much quicker and efficient way to get that capacity up for that ongoing collection opportunities. If we can utilize the existing infrastructure and permitted facilities that exist to provide that service.
I agree 100%. I think that's excellent. You're doing that. Especially, I would look at off-season access, October to April. That's a real gap, as we all know. So if they're willing to do that and they're open on, say, 3 days a week, or on Saturday, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, a Saturday would be critical. And we could direct people to them in the off season if they have a jar of mercury or, I've got a bunch of stuff. My grandmother died and we're cleaning out our house, the typical calls we all get. I think that'd be excellent. Thank you.
And there could be, I could envision just individual relationships with communities and one of these a nearby permanent facility saying, my resident shows up, that's going to be paid for by my, and I'm not having, I'm not having my 1 day collection because you're in close enough proximity and have more frequent hours for me to send my members over to the community to avail themselves of that service. And then there'll also just be door trade like there is at NDTT.
I think that's a good idea. And then the other thing comes to mind too, there's some items that folks take They're not the high level toxicity, but they're the vendors. I'm thinking of like the CRSs and others that take vapes and batteries, and they could take some of the chunks of these materials and be available as well. So if we can create a kind of integrated network, maybe it's a hodgepodge, but it's better than nothing. And again, off season is critical. Thank you.
Greg, if you're all set, I'll ask that you unraise your hand. Thank you. And then John?
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to circle back to Jan's comment about that line includes small business access and hauler, and I think that may not be quite written the way we meant it. We did, I know we didn't mean hauler access to the reciprocal events, so we'll circle back on that and talk about that again. I think maybe um, I can't say for certain, others may be able to clarify this, but I think the intent was to engage haulers in the discussion and development and expansion of these. It's kind of a infrastructure and access issue, and this gets to things we're going to talk about later, like the new FAC 110 contract, and making sure that haulers are engaged in the development of these events. I think that's what the intent of that was. So we'll just look at that again and maybe clarify it.
Thank you. Anybody else before we go to the next slide? Okay. So this slide, we're talking about the expansion of high volume and low toxicity collection with the goal of promote expanding EPR, which is extended producer responsibility, initiatives, and expand waste categories. The elements include support paint EPR in Massachusetts, support lithium ion battery EPR in Massachusetts, and assess other EPR programs that address HHPs. And just as a reminder, HHP is household hazardous products. If there's any comments or questions about this slide, please raise your hand. Lynn, do we have anything in the chat?
Yeah, not right now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mhm.
Claire, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. I was trying to find the button. Yeah, so I'm really happy to see DEP supporting these things. Can you say what you mean by support? Like show up at hearings, talk to legislators, or just answer questions? Because in my experience, DEP has not been very proactive on this front. They support it in principle, but is there any intention to become a little more aggressive about it and, forthright?
Greg, did you want to take this one? Is that why you raised your hand?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you know, hi, Claire. As we're in the midst of managing and the implementation of this EPR commission, and there'll be a meeting next week of the EPR commission to talk about mattresses, and we're also talking about a recommendation on paint. So folks are welcome to attend that. It's on our website under the EPR commission website that we have set up. And the public's encouraged to participate. And lithium batteries are in that review also that's coming with this EPR commission. So I'm anticipating that certainly we'll be taking the EPR commission will be recommending policies to the legislature in at least those areas that are stated in the statute. And then obviously we're going to still kind of look at what's going on in the other areas with the Vermont type law and whatnot. So my hope is that the EPR commission will give some momentum to the legislature and the administration to kind of pursue some of these things. In terms of us going and speaking at things, it's we serve under the administration and at the direction of them, and we're always available for folks to inquire and get our get information from us, get have our expertise on topics. And sometimes, there's just, it depends on the issue and we're not always, out there as a number one advocate of a particular legislative policy, not necessarily because the administration is against it, it just may not be the top priority at that time. And so, we certainly, hopefully, plans like this kind of put some emphasis on some of the topics that we think are important and that the public and stakeholders think is important, and that will advance more discussion.
Thank you. Phil, you have your hand raised? We can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, I put this in the chat too, just for a global comment, but you mentioned EPR. I think the commission's a good start on all of this, but for all of these elements, I would strongly encourage, and this is what happens, is we put all these efforts into these plans, and they kind of go into somewhere within your structure, and they're on a web page, and then we kind of lose track of them. So my biggest concern with all of this is that we have a follow-through process, a way to learn about what's going on, what you're doing, how we could help you, how we could brainstorm. And that was the idea of a SWAC subcommittee. I understand that's not going to happen, but at a minimum, I think this group, this team, the hazardous waste folks that have taken this over, if you could be on the agenda, John and Greg, maybe once a year to provide any updates about what you're doing with these implementation of these elements, so that we, the solid waste side, this is where we go to the SWAC, we can hear what's going on. I think that's critical. My concern is this will go into, a plan, and then we won't hear about what's going on or have an opportunity to get in to help you with what we're talking about, like these things. For example, also, I think reaching out in a very direct way to your counterparts in Vermont, especially Vermont, that's passed EPR for HHW, would be invaluable experience to this team. I think that would be all I'll say is they're doing a lot of work up in Vermont with batteries, and so I think we can learn a lot from Vermont and save us a lot of time and heartache. And so lastly, also reaching out to organizations to help the communities like Mass Municipal Association. So the theme is follow up, a process somewhere that we get to come back to you and hear what you're doing and give you comments a year from now about what's happening, however that's going to manifest. But I think the SWAC is probably the best place for you to do that.
Phil, if you're all set, I ask you lower your hand. Thank you. And then John?
Yeah, thanks. I think we're open to that, Phil. We didn't really make a proclamation about this, and maybe we should have, but if you look on our SWAC webpage where we have all of our quote subcommittees, and they go by different names, some of them are called subcommittees, some of them are called work groups, but we actually put a webpage up there for household hazardous products work groups. So technically we have that. We didn't make like a big announcement and to do about it, but we have kind of set up the, essentially created a group along those lines. Similar, in the same vein as the other subcommittees and work groups we have. All of those subcommittees and work groups, they kind of meet on, an irregular basis typically, kind of depending on what's going on and when we see the need for a meeting, when we think a meeting's productive. So the meeting frequency varies over time for each group, and it's kind of determined separately for each group. But I think we're open to more meetings of this group if we think it'll be helpful as we go. And then like we've done with other groups where they report periodically back to SWAC, I think we're open to that as well. So I think we can have that type of process going forward, and periodically assess and update this plan like we do with our other action plans. So I think we're there. Maybe it's our mistake for not being more proactive about stating that, but I think we're in agreement with that, and I think we're going to proceed with an approach somewhere along those lines.
Well, that's wonderful news. Thank you for that, because I was not aware of that. And I think you do need to say that at a SWAC meeting to let people know who are interested. And given all of the items that we've talked about in great detail and the increasing need and everything we've been telling you at these meetings, that I think this group, not everybody's going to be on it from the SWAC, of course, but I think, Greg, the things you just talked about with private, I mean, that would be a great um, agenda item. You can report back, let us know what's going on, how we can help. So, ever so often when you have something to say, let's do that. And then you put it out to that group. I presume if you're a member of the SWAC, you'll put it out through that channel, through that email channel, if there is a meeting of this group. Okay. I think that's a great improvement, and I would encourage you to do that because we want to keep the momentum going. So thank you for being open to that and consolidating on that page. I was not aware of that. So I would, let people know at the next SWAC that's out there. Great. And
Just so you know, that email invite that went out a couple of weeks ago has a link to that page.
okay.
Because this is where the draft plan was located. So that's the page.
Fantastic. I will just tell you from the user perspective, I mean, you guys, a lot of this stuff is probably in these details. A lot of folks that are managing facilities are running, they're very busy. They're going through emails. It gets lost. So we need a lot of reminding, a lot of hand holding, so bear with us. We've got many things that we're juggling. But I think this is important to have a touchstone that we all can come back to every so often on these issues. And I think now we have a placeholder for this it's different than before. So I think that's a step forward. So good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments or chats? Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Expansion of high volume and low toxicity collection. The goal here is to use of statewide government HHP OSD meaning Operational Services Division contract. These elements include publicized through MAX, MMA, MassDEP website availability of statewide government contract and current contract FAC 110 expiring on 6/25, and then the new contract is going to be WMR 001 on July 1st, 2025. And the second bullet point for the elements is to publicize vendor list on WMR 001. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this slide? Jan, I see you have your hand raised.
I do. So there we go. So for those of you who are familiar with FAC 110, as the Caitlin notes here, it's got a new name. And unfortunately, there were only 3 vendors who submitted bids for household hazardous waste collections, and we may only be able to keep 2 of them on. So that's not good news for folks who are needing to do household hazardous waste collections on state contract. And I think part of this, part of the notes may be like MassDEP does a great job with helping municipalities with trash hauling contracts. And maybe there needs to be a similar forum for going out to bid for household hazardous waste, regional collections or reciprocal collections, because I can tell you those 2 vendors' calendars are going to fill up in a nanosecond if they're not already full. And so there are going to be a lot of communities in 2025 that may not be able to access a household hazardous waste collection through state contract. The other thing is I'm just looking at the notes and I'm not sure the first bullet, permanent drop-off facility option, that's not in the current WMR 001. So I'm just wondering if that's something you're thinking about for 5 years from now or reopening the contract for that. Can somebody explain what that bullet means?
Was that from collection of permanent centers? I thought it was, I didn't think it was the establishment of a permanent center. I thought it was just
It says to
collection
provide
services.
services for the collection, including statewide contract, but that's not on the statewide contract. So I'm just wondering if there's another.
There's not a service for picking up materials from a permanent center?
Not for HHW. There's
All the other materials.
drop off for electronics, but that's the only category that has a drop off option.
Is that under, Jen, was that under category 1 maybe?
Kathy, do you want to
Yeah.
speak to that?
I wonder if it's about the wording here. Yeah, because if it's category 1 is about collection from permanent facilities. So I think perhaps the way it's worded here on the slide is what might be the cause of the confusion. So I just want to make sure it makes sense to Jim, because we've worked together and there may be others here on the call on the new contract. And so, I think from if I read it from Richard and Caitlin's perspective, it would be collection from, say, a municipal facility that's a permanent facility.
I see.
Category 1 pickup, I think.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, if it could just be clarified that it's collection from permanent facilities, maybe, instead of, because when I read it, I was thinking, it would be great, just what Phil was talking about earlier, and Greg was suggesting having more drop-off facilities, but that's not currently part of the contract. So I get it's more about the collection option.
Yeah, that would be separate from the, WMR 001. It's a separate initiative that we're working with the TSDF facilities in Massachusetts.
Great.
Phil, would you like to?
Yep. So follow up, I did look at the webpage very briefly, the work group. I think that's a good landing spot for folks that are on this call. So I would suggest you have some links for resources for a solid waste manager, something like that on that page, not just the documents about the work group, but the actual links to other parts of the DEP website, such as this contract or OST. I'd have a link to this contract. I'd have a link to the regs. I'd have a link to, SMRP and permanent collection, kind of a cheat sheet of what resources are you bringing to bear to help us do everything in your plan listed at that area for the managers, so we can maybe just bookmark it and we're not, again, the easier you make it for us, it's kind of redundant. You're getting it from different angles, but I think that would be useful. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Expansion of high volume and low toxicity collection. The goal is to pursue expansion of collection categories of MWC, municipal waste combustors, and MSPs, material separation plans. So the elements are funding from MWC's municipal separation plans for universal waste sheds that collect mercury added products. Categories in the next planning cycle may include lithium-ion battery collection and propane tanks, etc. Any questions or comments on this slide before we move on? Jan.
It's me again. I was gonna wait till the end to talk about the actual plan document, but we had a discussion. I made some comments back on the first plan. I'm kind of perplexed why the hazardous waste plan continues to include things like propane tanks, tires, and electronics, which people in the solid waste municipalities do not consider propane tanks an HHP. It's a solid waste issue. So again, I was going to circle back to that at the very end, but I'm just, maybe now that you have propane tanks on this high volume, low toxicity collection slide, someone can explain why the hazardous product plan continues to include solid waste items that are not hazardous by regulation.
I mean, I think we keep including the propane tanks, the 1 pound and 20 pounders, because they could be an explosion hazard. It's like an ignitability and explosion hazard. So if there's any residue propane left in the tanks, that's a problem. So people tend to show up at events with the tanks, and so they bring them there. So that's why, if we want to remove them from those one-day events and have them work them through MSPs, and we're starting up the discussions with MWCs, that's how we would get to those, and they could remove them from that waste stream, and then they can deal with it differently. Because you have to like purge them and remove it, because otherwise they could be an explosion hazard.
Sure. No, I understand. We've been collecting propane tanks for a long time.
Right.
And I understand, and I just saw from a note from in the chat from Cambridge that they collect tanks. So sure, maybe you want the combustors to pay for that. But at some point in this conversation, I'd like to circle back to the things that are not remotely hazardous, like tires and electronics.
Those are gone. We've removed those from the
They're
first
they're not
plan.
gone. They're
We're
not
not gonna-
gone. On the May 29th draft, I almost fell off my couch last night reading it because it talked about tires, or it lists tires in the back. But anyways, why don't we go through the rest of this slide, and then we can talk about the actual text plan, so we don't go down that hole right now.
Yeah, if it's in there, we'll be removing it too. Claire?
I would be thrilled to see these items included in the MSPs. I don't know what kind of a negotiation that's going to require with the combustors, but definition of hazardous waste aside, these are big problems. And until we can get some legislation passed, I would completely welcome relief on these things. They're dangerous. So thank you.
Okay. I just do want to take a note. If you know someone that is interested in participating, and maybe they you don't see them on the call and they should be, we have a couple people in the waiting room with phone numbers instead of their names. And just to prevent any Zoom issues, we want to make sure that people have real names so that we're only admitting real people. So if someone's supposed to be here and you're expecting them, please reach out to them and let them know to put their name in their Zoom account so that we see them as their name, not a phone number. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Expansion of high volume and low toxicity collection. The goal here is for MassDEP grant initiatives. Elements include SMRP Universal Waste Shed Grant, identify additional capital investment needs for other materials and infrastructure, e.g. waste oil tanks. And then the second element is technical assistance grants for HHP center planning. Also develop guidance for HHP center planning and staff training. Any questions or comments on this slide? Claire, if you're talking, you're muted.
I'm just talking to myself here. Sorry.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I got caught. But yeah, that would be helpful. We get a lot of help from our MAC for our hazardous, our permanent center planning. So that's great, and staff training. Hopefully we'll get to that point. So I'm happy to see that there.
Great. If there's no further comments, I'm going to continue on. Lynn, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, I thought, I was saying that tires were not included in the draft plan, but Claire alerted me to the fact that they're included they are still in table 1. Thanks. I mean, Jan did. Thank you, Jan. You're right about that. So we'll look into that. Thank you.
We'll take that out. Yeah.
And I just want to point out, they did come out of the high volume, low toxicity. I mean, yes, the high volume, low toxicity list, but I was kind of surprised that there's a bunch of things on the table 1 that kind of included, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. Expansion of high volume, low toxicity collection. The goal is to consider and expand support for infrastructure/equipment to accept and manage these materials. Elements include reduce, reuse, repair microgrants and recycling and reuse business development grants. Any questions? Moving on that one. Education, outreach, and training. The goal is to provide training to municipal officials, Elements include MassDEP to provide technical assistance on event permits, reciprocal agreements, and streamline approval processes. Next element is in-person meetings and conferences to encourage networking, e.g. Barnstable County. Phil?
Again, this group could be an effort to do that and to promote that on that website that you provide the link to at the SWAC. So any kind of information, and I would urge you to any recordings of those trainings that you feel would be applicable to others later on that could not make that, to put those recordings on that page too. So it'd be like just again leveraging your resources that you would say guidance, technical assistance on permitting reciprocal agreements. You have a video on that, then you put it on that page.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, moving on. Education, outreach, and training. Goal is to update MassDEP websites. Elements include assess current information and expand informative resources for residents and municipalities. I'm going to keep going on that one, unless anybody has anything.
Just what I've been talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Education, outreach, training. Goal is to assist the general public on disposal and proper management opportunities. Elements include direct assistance through MassDEP email portal for resident questions. Another element is MWCs, MACs, and other organizations can provide training to their residents as to reduce improper disposal and answer questions from the general public. Phil, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I mentioned this last time. I'll put this in the chat too. I think you need to work with all your EEA agencies to get this information out. They have portals for, I would imagine, in guidance on use of state parks, on, for hunters in the field, and, coastal preservation, coastal zone management, whatever. I think cross promotion to other sectors through whatever angle works to let them know about all these opportunities with people that are environmentally conscientious, they're going to those other websites. So again, integration, spreading the message, again, people using parks or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you can come up with a number of these connections. It's just a matter of doing some effort to reach out to them and cross promoting and putting links everywhere so that we're getting as wide a message as possible. And then reaching out to also, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, Kathy, is there any way to put this information on Recycling Works and or Beyond the Bin or Recycle Smart Mass or something like that, where you can direct people towards resources?
Definitely, that's a good point. Some of it is there in Recycle Smart and Beyond the Bin, but we are in the process and we continually try to enhance and grow that. So I appreciate that, and it's certainly on our radar. For Recycling Works, I would have to defer to John because he oversees the commercial branch and the work that Recycling Work does. But I imagine that would be a similar thing.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Education, outreach, and training. The goal is to assist the general public on disposal and proper management opportunities continued. Elements include promote voluntary private collection efforts and to expand knowledge of proper latex paint disposal and recycling / encourage paint recycling programs. If there's no questions or comments, we'll move on. Education, outreach, and training. Goal is to encourage disaster preparedness. Elements include encourage municipalities to incorporate HHP management options into disaster management plans. Lynn, is there anything in the chat? And you're muted, so I can't hear you if there are.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, excuse me. Phil repeated his point about including links and resources. And he said also let's see,
There was like
yeah,
the
show
thermostat
links to these.
recycling group. Those are the websites you mentioned. All those programs, I couldn't get it out fast enough. You're moving pretty quickly here. So I would just have links to those. So if there are resources from municipalities from those programs, we could link to them and find out what those are. In terms of MEMA and all the plans, I've talked to John about this. You have Ashbrit and you have GMC. One picks up disaster debris, one manages the paperwork. I would encourage any efforts you have with MEMA, John, on contracts and state resources that they are in place if there were a disaster, that the state has already arranged for resources from hazardous waste respondents. I would encourage the staff to reach out to LA County, the City of LA, Sanitation District, on an EPA, whatever region is on the West Coast, about how they triaged and managed the disaster with the fires in LA. I think you can learn a lot from the hierarchical flow chart of what they did, because there was once they got going, it was a process. This is hazardous waste, this is universal waste, this goes to this landfill over here. And see how your documents support that, with not just having municipalities figure it out, but if you had some state resources that were already in place, like contracts ready to go. So, thanks.
I apologize if I was moving too quickly. Maybe just take a second here to pause if anybody has any further questions.
Yeah, I just want to add, so Phil, the links that you mentioned in your comment. So we're going to be adding a lot of those resources to that, the work group page for this program. So we're going to we just started this page a few weeks ago. So we're just slowly adding stuff. We'll be adding the recordings from these meetings. There's 2 of them there already. This one will be up there. So we'll be adding more information on there. We're actually having additional help through staffing resources. So that's going to be one of their items to do. Updating information and getting that information out there.
Okay. If there's no further questions or comments, I'm going to move on. Encourage purchase of low and non-toxic alternatives. The goal here is to expand adoption of EPPs within state and municipalities. Elements include work with OSD to make EPPs more readily accessible and available. Consider modifying RDP points to increase incentives. Consider grants to pilot and test recycled content products, e.g. recycled paint. Continue to require EPP purchasing policies with annual SMRP application requirements. Phil, you have your hand raised?
This kind of goes to previous comments about leading by example. So I would suggest you reach out to DCAM and partner with OSD on this. How, if at all, and I'm not saying you're not, is DCAM using these products? How is the state itself incorporating and supporting the vendors that produce these products? And could you show some examples? So on the grant page, Kathy, case studies of, whatever, MassDOT painted their buildings in recycled latex paint and it worked great, whatever. But I think the more experience with products that are out there and the state is advocating for these, it would be great if they could use them and maybe be a guinea pig, because they have a little more money than we do, and let us know how it goes.
Claire?
Hi, yeah, I think there's a good opportunity now, since DEP is going to be requiring updated EPP policies for towns, to emphasize this when communicating with the municipalities. I have a question about consider grants to pilot and test recycled content products. By whom? To municipalities, companies? Is there a need for this? Has that been expressed, that testing recycled content products, people are skeptical about them? What's the rationale on that one? And can you be a little more specific?
I think the goal here is to obtain more general information of use and preference or savings or availability.
Greg has his hand raised.
Greg? Oh, does he? I don't see that.
Yeah. Hi. So yeah, I think that we obviously the best mechanism for us to work through on this kind of increasing EPPs is to work through OSD. They have a program over there which has a lot of environmentally preferred products in there. And I think we are thinking that we can provide assistance, that might put some emphasis more on the ones that the EPPs that we might be of most interest. I've seen them do lending exercises and trainings for electric yard equipment, whether it's lawnmowers or hedgers or whatnot. I think we can do the same thing, have experiences with paint. I know they already maybe do have a lot of examples, and just the cross communication between OSD and its audience, which is often purchasing managers and may not be the recycling folks in the community, is important too, to kind of get the information. I'm sure they have a lot of case uses on various products, and we're thinking we can get new products on contract. We can test those products. We can provide some grants for people to pilot them and see how they work, and do that demonstration to hopefully advance the use of them. John?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on Claire's point. You kind of addressed it, Greg. The only other thing I was going to say is, that could potentially be either state agencies or it could be municipalities. I think one of the first programs I worked on at MassDEP was we were giving out grants. I think there were matching grants for purchasing re-refined motor oil or recycled paint. I think that was way back in 1995. That was the kind of stuff we were thinking about. I think it's still an open discussion as to what products that might be, but we were having some of that conversation with OSD already and saying, what are these reduced toxicity products on state contract that maybe aren't getting purchased a lot, and can we identify those and identify why they're not getting purchased? Is it price? Or is it concerns about quality? Is it availability? Is it colors? When it comes to paint, trying to figure out what the barriers are. And if there's concerns about product quality, uncertainty about product quality, we thought grants like this could maybe help get companies over the hump and more comfortable with purchasing them. So that was kind of what we were thinking about. But it could be, I think we were thinking either state agencies or municipalities.
Phil, you have your hand raised?
Yes, Kathy, I'm thinking at the top of my head here. Again, yeah, state agencies definitely, if state agencies use these products, tell those stories. But within the SMRP, RDP community, and this is going to be an increased requirement, I think sharing success stories, case studies, all the efforts through that program could be shared throughout the grant year on a regular basis, like an RDP newsletter, something like that, that's on there, so that we're hearing. So some of the resistance you may see, John, is just time and effort and mental bandwidth. It's, I got to start another pilot project. I got to do another project. It's just a lot. We're all very, very busy. So I think the easier you can make it for folks and understand how it worked and how you did it. Others were anxious to be a leader. That's fine. But all these things require a lot of staff time and effort in communication. So the more you can show us how to do it, or others that have done it in a variety of ways, that'd be helpful.
Kathy?
I want to say I really appreciate that comment and feedback. Thank you for the suggestion. And it also makes me think about, in addition to the newsletter idea and sharing success stories, like way back in the day, there used to be, some of you may remember, OSD would have like a fact sheet about a certain product and who was using it, and then the the costs, the benefits, and all of, some other key key reasons to go down that road and to make it easier to use, to put it in the hands of those who are doing the procurement. So I think that was helpful back in the day, maybe something like that again. And when we do have some case studies and success stories to share, I will connect with the Recycle Smart team too, because we may be able to kind of push those out. Like, it's a nice pat on the back too, if agencies are using these environmentally preferable products and to the benefit of all. So thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. And again, not everybody's comfortable with OSD and navigating state contracts. You could have a little 10-minute video on how to use OSD and state contracts for those who have never done it. Anything you can do to make it simpler, easier, understandable. Often we're scrambling to do what the tasks are for the grant period and, later in the grant year than maybe we should. But that's why I say if you spread it out all year long and make the resources available, it kind of reminds us that we could start sooner, but then also know that we're not starting from zero. We're starting from, a much further place along the whole planning process. It'd be very helpful, I think, to others. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the next slide is encourage purchase of low/non-toxic alternatives. The goal is to encourage consumers to switch to less hazardous alternative products. Elements include encourage retailers to provide HHP alternatives and encourage consumer use/switch to viable alternatives. Jan?
Yeah, I know this is a long way off. This is great. Thank you for adding this. I think unfortunately, and again, this is like in the day when you get to this, to actually working on this, there are a lot of products that make themselves seem non-toxic or less toxic or have names like, green cleaning solution that actually have hazardous chemicals in them. And so just kind of an FYI, this is maybe a little bit of a bigger task than it seems like, because for me, it's great to encourage retailers, but to leave them to this on their own, I think they would default to products that are not necessarily, toxic free, but maybe seen that way, or they're told they're less hazardous. So we see this all the time, even on OSD contracts, on EPP contracts. If you look at some of the SDS sheets, you'd be a little surprised at products that kind of meet the definition of an EPP. And so anyways, just kind of a note about, this a little smoke and mirrors trick that happens with non-toxic products or less toxic alternatives.
Thank you. John? John, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I wasn't going to comment on Jan's comment in particular, except I agree. But what I was going to point out is something else. I don't think we talked about it. If we did, I apologize for the redundancy, but I just wanted to flag this to make sure we mention it. We did put this time frame column in here in the plan. If people haven't noticed that as we've gone, so we have 3 categories right now of time frame. One is ongoing, so those are things that we're doing already. Many of them are on an annual basis. Then shorter term, things we anticipate implementing within the next 1 to 2 years. And then longer term, like this one, which are ones we anticipate implementing over a 3 to 5 year time frame. So I just wanted to highlight that for people that we were trying to prioritize when these would be done over time, because we didn't necessarily think we could do all of these things at once. So that was just to flag that if you didn't notice that there's this time frame column that you should keep in mind as you look at the draft plan.
Thank you. Phil?
To that point, John, if you could put that definition you just explained in the front of the document, if it's not explained.
It is just,
okay, right.
Just before the tables.
Okay, great, thanks. With regard to retailers, I think you guys have a great opportunity with the EPR Commission, with the Retailers Association of Massachusetts, gentleman right there. So perhaps if you could speak to him and ask for his assistance with his association and doing what you're encouraging to do here with providing resources, and maybe there's a campaign they could come up with to guide, provide information to their members that would direct to resources, customers to resources in their area or whatever at DEP so that they know what to do with something, because often they buy stuff and then maybe they need to know where to take it at the end of the life. And if we have the retailers helping them out, like you're talking about here, so you've got the folks from RAM who are opposed to paint EPR, but maybe this is an opportunity to say, well, could you do this? Could you help us out here? So just a thought.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. That is all we have for our table today. Before I close out, does anybody have any questions or Jan?
Yeah, are you able to, I mean, this was great. Thank you for doing that, the tables, but I think the other piece of the plan is the text. And so when I was reading it last night, I had some comments that feel very familiar to previous comments. And I'm wondering if we can take some time, we have time on the meeting, if we can take some time to look at some of those, the text. So specifically, maybe while you're digging up the text, the actual action plan. There's a bullet again that talks about low hazard, high volume waste and includes, quote, universal waste, including TVs, computers, and other electronics. And I mentioned this earlier, and I double checked on the MassDEP website. Electronics are not universal wastes in the state of Massachusetts, and most people in the municipal side consider them a solid waste. And so I'm just kind of curious about that. I know, a broken CRT, sure, if it's a smashed CRT, yes, it becomes a hazardous waste, but those are incredibly rare. And maybe if that's what you're getting at, you just want to say, broken CRT monitors or something, broken CRT screens. And what should be listed under universal waste are the mercury, the lamps, the thermostats, thermometers, and mercury containing products. Those are universal waste. So that's one comment. And then on the tables, I had a conversation with DEP folks about the fact that the tables, and I think Phil brought this up in the very first meeting. In table 1, it talks about households served, percent household serves, population served, which makes it look awesome, right? It makes it look like, wow, we're serving, 40%. But in reality, and Claire knows this, and Calliope and anybody who runs facilities, and I shared this information with DP, 2%, 4 to 2% of those households actually participate. So you have access. Sure, I have 60,000 people in my district. 400 of them come to my hazardous waste day. So I think there's a little, I don't think that table is an accurate representation of what's actually happening in that hazardous waste field, the municipal hazardous waste field. And so I had hoped that would be adjusted to have something more accurate. Because 2% is a lot different than 60%, right? It's just not even, I don't think it's appropriate to include these numbers. And then I was concerned last night when I saw again auto tires, electronics, sharps. We don't consider sharp. I don't know. Maybe it's just Franklin County. We have a separate program for sharps. We don't count them as a household hazardous waste. We count fire extinguishers as solid wastes. So, I saw this again last night, and just personally, professionally, it feels like there's again this disconnect between the solid waste people and the hazardous waste people, and like, how are these things really being managed? And yeah, we report this on our data sheets. I report how, that my facilities collect fire extinguishers or they collect electronics. But just because I report on the data sheet doesn't mean that it's a hazardous waste. And so I really encourage the solid waste people and the hazardous waste people to talk. about and reach out again to people who are running programs. Like, what do you consider a household hazardous waste? So I'd love to see that table. And then table two is the same thing, one day events. 2 million people served. Well, 2 million households aren't served. There's 2% of my population that's served. So maybe 2% of 2 million is really the accurate number there. So I'm just very concerned about having this data in the HHP plan that makes it look like we don't need to do anything. We're covered. 82% of households have access. We're served. Doesn't even say access. They're served. I would retire tomorrow if we had 2 million households using our hazardous waste collections. And all of my towns would be bankrupt if we did. And that's the other side of it. We never talk about this, but the more people, right? We want to encourage more people to use our programs. But towns can't afford more people to use their hazardous waste programs. And so there's this real conundrum in the household hazardous waste field of, yeah, we want more stuff out of the waste stream, but how do we pay for more stuff? So if we're wildly successful, we can't afford it. And that's a topic that hasn't even come up here. And maybe it's part in the beginning about, funding, but those are real issues. So I would encourage DP to, for the two sides to have a conversation or have another conversation and kind of clean this up so that it really just includes hazardous waste.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, we've gone back and forth with the language and
Yeah,
data, so I'm
it's a work in
sorry to see
process.
that the tires are
Progress.
still on there, but yeah, thank you for that input.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to go in the order of which you raised your hand. So Claire,
Yeah, kind of not challenging Jan's point, but I think maybe another column would probably be good because I mean, households having access is an important metric, whether they use it or not. But I think maybe pointing out how many actually make use of it. As Jan said, 2% is about what we get. We should be getting, if people cleaned out every time they moved, maybe every 8 or 10 years, we should get 10 to 15% of our population households every year. But as Jan said, we could never afford that. We can, and nor is there the capacity, given, as Jan pointed out, we only had 3 bids on the state contract for hazardous waste collections. And, that's pretty dismal. And we already were in a crunch for trying to get service. There's just not capacity. There don't seem to be a lot of companies that want to provide this service. So, so that's another issue that will need to be addressed. Why is it? It's so expensive? The regulations are really onerous, which they kind of need to be, but it's a heavy lift for a company to provide hazardous waste collection service. And so we can't get to full participation without money and more service providers. But back to the table, I would suggest adding another column of actually how many people show up for these events. If you can get that data. I know I collect it. I think most towns collect the number of people that attend these events. So so that's all. Thank you.
Phil?
With regard to access in the data that Jan and Claire are describing, what is missing here is the gap in coverage over the entire calendar year. So access it's limited. There's a capacity factor, I will call it, kind of like, wind turbines, the access is only seasonal. So it's not true access year round. So you have to discount the access by the fact that there aren't collection sites. There are some permanent, and we've talked about that, but these one-day events especially, we shut down in October, November, December, January, February, March, whatever, 4 or 5 months. I mean, the middle of winter, it's tough, right? Again, jars of mercury don't, work on a schedule. That's convenient for us. So I think what we're saying, or at least I'll say it, is that in your preamble, more discussion of the realities of the gaps in coverage, such that the upper echelons in the government at DEP and EEA understand that there has been a progress over the last 25, 30 years. We've removed a lot, but the system needs to be reformed. It needs to be better funded. It needs to be um, beefed up with vendors who want to be here in municipalities that want to take advantage. There are no requirements that a municipality host any of these operations, these events, unless I'm mistaken. And Claire and I know of a community that's near both of our counties that have zero support from the town. They leave their residents with nothing. And I bet there are other communities out there and they beg to come to our collections. So what are those people to do but throw it in the trash or hire a vendor? And, again, I can't stand these commercials that, the magic, 1-800 company. I won't mention the name. It's magic. They're with wands, make it all go away. And there's hazardous waste in the picture, and they got gasoline cans, and the people are just thinking they can throw it all in a big container, and it goes to Magic Land. So I think recognizing there's work to be done, but also understanding, Greg, that some of these things we're talking about are structural on a higher level at the cabinet level in the legislature. So I would encourage you to reach out to the people on this call again periodically. How can we help you brainstorm on that and get this funding? Maybe there's some way to do it through a, God forbid, some sort of fee on the sale of HHP, HHW. I don't know how they're doing it. That's why EPR, would be nice. But we're in this point where the system's aging. It's stressed, it's strained, and it's getting more expensive. And the conundrums that Jan mentioned about cost and access, I think they need to be expressly stated so that the leadership at all levels understand that it's a serious issue. This is a serious issue, and it needs attention by the leaders of our state. Um, you know, and we can help you with that.
Okay. Jan or John, did you have a thought about that or something new?
Anne can go first because I was going to follow up on her comments. So if she has anything else to say, I can follow up on that too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just realizing as with what Phil was talking about that, this is an interesting table one. Okay, those are the products, but I think the deeper dive or the data that would be really more helpful, more important is region by region or town or county or maybe you literally have to list the communities that have programs and the communities that don't. And then in those populations, who's yeah, rural versus urban too. Yeah, sure. Because I think, in the beginning, and I noted this and I thought, great, like the first goal, one of the goals is to provide more opportunities to basically underserved communities. And my first thought was, well, which ones are those? Are you just talking about EJ? You don't use the term EJ communities, you just say communities that lack recycling and disposal services or options. So, well, who are those? Which communities are those? And I think for this plan to really, for us to really do something with it, it's not really table one that matters. It's looking at table three, which would be these are the pockets in the Commonwealth that don't have any access. And these are the pockets that have, been doing collections for 30 years and they could use more seasonal access. And, and that would be the other part of that table. And so I'm giving you folks more work and maybe you're just like, yeah, right, Jan, next decade. But, what this doesn't say is how many months out of the year do these residents have access. So sure, they can bring their, chemicals once a year in Franklin County or to 6 regional collections, 6 reciprocal collections. But the rest of the year, as Phil said, it's a desert. It's a HHW desert. And so that's for me, now that I'm really thinking about it, though, that's the data that is really important to build a plan or to build an action plan around. You need to know who's not being served, or when they're not being served, to really implement some of the strategies we've just gone through.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I knew I should wait. So I think one thing we could think about doing in response to some of this comment, and I don't know exactly what it would be, but I think there could be a role for some GIS mapping for some of the programs, things like the permanent collection centers, things like that. And we haven't really talked about this or thought this through, so this is something that would take some more thought, but we could think about, some ways to present and show that information maybe through a GIS approach as we go. So we can think about that. This table one, the wording in this table, I think one thing we could do is change a simple thing we could do is change this to maybe write it in terms of access versus served, because I think you're right, Jan. It's a little different, and you're correct that this doesn't mean that all these people are actually using the center. So if we draw the distinction, at least to start, just draw this distinction that this is access. And then we can look at, as you talked about, some of the data to the extent it's available about, amount of materials collected or amount of people actually using programs. That's something we could think about gathering more systematically. What's the other point I was going to make? Just the materials in this table. I think tires in it is an example of one, maybe at the far end of that spectrum that maybe doesn't fit, but we were trying to view this kind of broadly, to view products that maybe not hazardous waste. I mean, technically none of it's hazardous waste until it's collected, but products that maybe aren't hazardous waste, but maybe are hazardous in other ways. I think the best example is what Richard was talking about, like propane tanks, because there are, they are hazardous material. They're different than cardboard. So that's why they're here. I suppose you could argue about the scope, about some of the individual products, whether they should be listed or not. Latex paint, obviously it's listed because it's associated with other paint collections, so that's why it's here. We were just trying to view it more inclusively, and that I think also gets to why we call this a hazardous household products plan versus household hazardous waste. Just trying to view it a little bit more broadly in terms of the product categories we're thinking about. You could probably debate that, but I think something being listed here doesn't necessarily harm the overall plan. I think, the only one I would agree with that maybe shouldn't be here for sure is tires. I think all the others you can make a case in some shape or form why maybe they fit this inclusive view. So that was my comment on the materials being listed here. And I had another follow-up thought, but it's a lot there and I can't think of the other one anyway, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Lynn, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, Claire suggested changing the title of that table, of table one. And Anthony Garris from Barnstable County said a good point is what access will be defined as. An event 1.5 hours away would be very tough, especially for many who aren't as privileged to have vehicles.
Phil, I see you have your hand raised.
Great to see Barnstable County on the call. Anthony.
Absolutely. I'm listening, I'm observing, getting ready.
Anthony, by the way, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. He took over for Calliope Chute, who retired, who was our hero. Hey, there you are, Calliope. All right. Fantastic. So all her experience and wisdom, I'm glad you're on this call, Calliope, because you're hearing a lot of stuff, and please shoot
Oh,
some
I have
emails to
a
the team
laundry
here.
list worth of
Um,
points.
What comes to mind, Kathy, charm facilities, John? Maybe there's an overlap here that could be communicated in the same outreach efforts for these hard to manage items that aren't necessarily hazardous waste but have risk associated with them. Thinking off the top of my head here.
I was thinking that as well. It's in my notes to think about because Charm Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, and so they do have a broader kind of an understanding of what's collected at those facilities. I do, not to push back on tires at all, because certainly it's defined as solid waste in the regs. I guess I was just thinking about recent learning that they are a primary source of microplastics, are tires. So just a little nugget to put out there. Not sure that means that they're hazardous just by the nature of the source and the quantity, but and I'm no expert in that space, but just there's a lot to it.
Yeah. For
Okay.
example, I got calls on solar panels. So, and it helped update some of the DEP websites on that. So, we're going to get these oddball items more and more and more.
Does anyone want to go through any of the narrative or at this point, or what do you all want to do?
I'm going to scroll to the top of the document just to show it.
If people have comments on the document, they could actually send them to us.
Via email after the meeting.
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly too, I know that the link is available, but if you just were to Google swacmath.gov, you can click on the first link, scroll to the bottom where it says committees and working groups, household hazardous products work group. When you click on that, this is where we're going to be posting all the information as it comes up. So you can click on the action plan. You guys are seeing this, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you can scroll through and see, this is the text before. There's 1, 2, 3 pages of text before the table of which we discussed in the meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we continue or before we conclude the meeting? Again, you can always email me. My email address is on the website.
Also, I just want to add, a
As
little
is
bit of
John's.
information on table 1 and table 2. When we started this process 6 months ago, we had no idea exactly when we got this given to us to work on. We didn't have any idea or get our hands around it. So we were looking at all that data that we had that the solid waste group collect. And so we looked at this data to see what's there, what would be considered, and these items were actually kind of selected based on the original 1990, mid-90s plan that was in there. And they talked about all these different kind of things. So we had that in there. So that was the genesis for this table. Yes, it could be refined. Yes, it could be better. The data that was available from the data that the solid waste group collects, we use that data. Yeah, the terminology could be better as opposed to serve, to access and whatnot. But that was just basically to get the conversation started among us and help us kind of focus. So I think it's important to have the information. I think what came out of this discussion with regard to the gaps in coverage, the seasonality, I think that's more important than what these numbers represent. Again, at one point, the first one, waste engine oil, over 1 million houses serve. We don't have data to see who actually uses that or not. If it's like 2% or 4% of that. So, that was basically how it got this going, this ball rolling. I think a better metric would be to, like Jan said, table 3, that doesn't exist right now, but I think we could look into that and kind of develop that a little bit better. I don't really want to go back and recalculate these numbers or apply a factor of 2% or 4% because we really don't know what that is. We could try to get the data, that would be useful. Find out which towns offer these, services, how often they do it. That could be something that we can do. That will take time though, and it's a lot of work and effort. So just kind of want to keep that in mind. But the genesis, the reason why this table is in here is basically just to kind of get us thinking about this plan and formulate some of these ideas that we presented here today in the prior two meetings.
Phil, you have your hand raised?
Yes, last comment. I have to go. Great progress. I think this is very helpful. And that page you showed is where I was talking about the landing spot for the municipalities. And this is for John. You don't need to respond, but I think you get the idea that how this gets incorporated into the solid waste master plan with some more text and comments. And I think it's okay to not have all the answers in your solid waste master plan, but you identified where we need improvement. That plan goes out to a lot of folks, and we need folks in the legislature at the highest echelons in the state to understand that municipalities need this help. So I think if the comments could be distilled into the master plan, how this plan gets integrated into the master plan would be useful for that document. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any final comments before we sign off for the day? Again, you can always email us on the SWAC website. There's John's email, and then underneath that Household Hazardous Action Plan website, there's mine. And those will be circled back to the group. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate you joining us. This recording will be posted on the SWAC website. And yeah, have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.